This week, we welcome Dutch Schwartz, Cloud Security Strategist at AWS, to discuss the cloud's influence on the evolving culture of security. In the Leadership and Communication section, are businesses under-investing in cybersecurity? 4 tips to help CISOs get more C-suite cybersecurity buy-in, new CISO priorities of 2021, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Deepwatch provides innovative managed security services that empower organizations to be more resilient against today's evolving cyber threats. Deepwatch offers game-changing capabilities in managed detection and response, managed endpoint detection and response, and vulnerability management. All delivered through a unique squad model, a dedicated group of security experts that works directly with each client. From managed security operations to threat hunting to continuous measurement of security readiness, Deepwatch is advancing the service of managed security. Measure your SecOps maturity for free by visiting securityweekly.com/Deepwatch.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 206, recorded February 22nd, 2021. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado. Joining me from the newly remodeled G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island are both of my co-hosts today, Mr. Paul Asadorian and Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
Hey, Matt. It's good to be here.
We've got great. This is great.
Cigars for the European market, actually,
Yes.
is what we're
Nice.
smoking.
Very
These
nice.
are, I tend to like, I don't know, for whatever reason, cigars that were made for the European
Yes.
market are ones that I really like. I'm like,
Yeah,
why
that's
don't you make these available in the U.S.? They're happen
Pretty
to be,
good. They're pretty good.
They're good, right?
Yeah. So
yeah.
I have a parental win just before we start, right? So I had daddy-daughter day over the weekend, and we went out for breakfast together, and we're making paper airplanes out of the napkins, right? And my daughter grabs it and starts flying around. She goes, "Dad," and on the little placemat there was like a snow globe. "I'm attacking the Death Star." This is my 7-year-old daughter. I'm like, win.
Raise them well.
Win.
Yes.
So figured you appreciate that.
It's awesome.
Now everybody got a plenty good view of the new studio setup, so thank you
It's
all
interesting.
for all
It's
your
more
work.
for us than it is for the viewers. It's more so we can see, and just so the audience knows, right? We can, in the audio, I guess it doesn't make a difference, but we can see all of our guests now. We've got actually 17 screens here in the studio, which means on each side we can see all of the guests and hosts at a glance, which is, I mean, the next best thing to those being in studio. But I think it adds to, I think, to the production value, even in the audio, that all of the hosts can see everyone that's on the show on their own screen. So
Outstanding job to the crew.
yes,
Great
thank
job.
you
Great
everyone.
job.
It was truly a team effort across Security Weekly and CRA to get it all together. So
Yes. Do you want to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly? Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher, on our YouTube channel, sign up for the mailing list, and join our Discord server. Also, do you have any specific guests or topics that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review those suggestions monthly, and we'll reach out once you've been approved. Our guest for this segment is Dutch Schwartz. He has 25 years of experience in technology, from startups to 5 Fortune 500 companies. Having worked with more than 50 CISOs of Fortune 500 companies to create cybersecurity solutions, he understands the evolution of CISO responsibilities and the challenge which security teams face. Dutch holds a Master's of Business Administration in Global Management and was a strategy and planning officer in the U.S. Army. He melds his formal training with his practical experience in cybersecurity to develop cloud security strategies for customers of Amazon Web Services. Dutch, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Hey, thanks. I'm thrilled to be here.
Now, 2 weeks ago, right before we took the break last week for President's Day, we were talking about the evolution of the CISO role. This week, we're going to talk about the evolution of the culture of security. And we had a very interesting conversation, as most of our listeners probably know, we do prep calls with our interviews because we want to kind of prepare for and kind of figure out the flow. I have like almost a full page of notes talking to Dutch, which usually doesn't happen in a prep call.
Yeah,
So
well, I mean,
we're
the two topics are joined together, of course, right? I mean, they're really threaded together. I mean, the backdrop to why culture is important or more important is because the role has evolved, right? The importance of CISOs and the security teams has changed, and that's sort of not like everybody loves what they do and wants to feel like it's really important, but that is the case, right? The move of CISOs historically being part of IT and sort of underneath the CIO to being at the adult table, as we like to say, that's an indicator, right, of really what's changed.
Yeah, and I think where I want to start is before we talk about kind of cloud's influence on this evolution of the culture of security. I think it helps us to kind of step back and kind of like what was or is the prevailing culture of security. You mentioned it a little bit, right?
Right.
We were under IT and under the CIO. We're starting to come out from there. What is the kind of prevailing kind of culture of security that you've seen across the customer base?
Yeah, I mean, you see the typical array of where people are. Some of it's just based on the overall culture and the nature of the business, right? And so some will just be historically kind of slower to just in general, right, to adopt changes. But overall, it's been an issue of if you think of where CISOs and the security teams were underneath of IT, then they're really squarely a cost center. Mm-hmm. And they're one of those departments that people really don't think about if you're a regular employee until something goes wrong. And so it really kind of made it very technically focused. And in candor, especially if you go back 5, 6, 7 years, there wasn't even a CISO title for a lot of, especially medium and small companies at all. And so really the de facto CISO was just the smartest security nerd. And I say that lovingly, being one, but that's really what it was, right? Somebody, had an interest in security or, moved down the security path and they sort of became the de facto person because they had sort of signed up for that and had an interest in that 10 years ago. And so it's still a very, emergent role. And so how the CISO goes is how the security team goes, right? So what I see majority-wise is we're still coming out of an on-premise, situation where still a lot of CISOs are still reporting into CIOs. And again, that trend is changing in the last 3 or 4 years, but there's still a lot of those cases. And so just by the nature of the org chart, you're not getting the same level of interaction, right, with the rest of the C-suite that you would get if you had an actual seat at the table.
It's interesting when I think about culture. I go back to, and I'm listening to a book that was covering the DNC hack. Mm-hmm. And we actually touched on some of this during the show, how political parties and campaigns will kind of stand up a lot of infrastructure really quickly.
Yep.
Right.
But to the culture point, they don't really have an organizational culture so much. I mean, the culture is really very closely tied to the political campaign, and that's their goal. They don't really have an IT culture, let alone a security culture. And then I think what's really unfair is you pitted an organization with those systemic issues, and I mean, not so much issues, that's just the nature of the game, up against Russian nation-state hackers. Like, that is the most unfair thing, I think, in all of, nation-state hacking and hacking incidents. But it shows you how important culture is, Dutch. I don't know if you can kind of speak to that. I thought it was interesting to think about it in that light.
Yeah, I think that, so when you think about culture, it feels like kind of one of those squishy terms, right? So they're sort of soft. What does it mean, right? So it helps to think about, I kind of ground myself in like, what are the attributes, right? So the attributes of culture are they're implicit, they're shared, they're pervasive, and they're enduring. Those are the 4 attributes of it. It helps us think about it. And to me, when I talk with customers and try to help people on this, the fact that it's implicit means you have to stop and think about it. You have to chart, where is my culture today, right? What is important to us? And if you don't do that, it's pervasive. So it's going to happen without you, right? And it's sort of like your reputation. You can say whatever you think your reputation is. That's actually what happens when you leave the room. That's your reputation.
Right.
Culture is what happens to not the person at corporate headquarters who's right there with all the HR resources and all the things that they need because they're at, sort of the campus. It's that remote employee, especially, back in the day, who's not as plugged in and who doesn't have regular interactions with everybody, especially at scale, that's your culture. That's what's really happening. And so you have to stop and say, hey, what is our culture? And the step one, like everything we do, is you got to measure that, right? And you can. There's good models of how you do that, but it simply starts with, what is our culture? And there's good research now that shows that it's really important. So George Finney, the CISO for SMU, published a book called Well Aware. It's a great book, by the way. And he looked at this, and if you have poor culture, you're 3 times more likely to be breached. Poor culture, 3 times more likely to breach. I can't say that enough, right? There's your clear indicator. And why is that? So you can start to peel back culture. Well, because if I have a poor culture, not even just a poor security culture, just a poor culture, what does that mean? Employees are disengaged. They're not as motivated. They won't pause and go, should I click on this? Right? They're in a hurry. Right? They move quickly. They don't log out. They don't do all the kind of basic hygiene things that we would ask them to do as a security person, because they're not engaged, right? They don't feel like it's important. They don't feel heard. They don't feel connected. So it sounds like a really soft thing, but it's a really critical thing. If you don't get culture correct.
I think Dutch, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it sounds like you study this more than I have, that you've done a really good job with culture when other people outside third parties understand your culture. And I think of Apple. Many of us know a part of Apple's culture is really much a lot of secrecy, right? Protecting what's happening right now until such time it is public. I think it was Hyundai that deal fell through. Hyundai should have understood their culture of secrecy, but ended up talking about the Apple car, and I believe that killed the deal. So I think an important part of culture is that it happens kind of its own thing, and other third parties become aware of it.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think as security leaders within an organization, we have the opportunity, and I'll call it an opportunity, to influence the culture. I rewind 6 years ago in my organization, right? Now, I made my way through the ranks, right? I was a director of operations and technology with a huge security focus, right? Eventually became CISO with the seat at the table with the CEO. And I remember the first conversations around security being like insurance. And I had the opportunity to educate my CEO, educate the leaders within the organization, and that catapulted the importance of security to the business. Granted, we're a technology services organization, we're a managed service provider, but we have 6,000 customers who have a level of expectation that we're going to do the right thing by them. We have the keys to the castle to a lot of their infrastructure, right? I mean, being an MSP. So ultimately, it was an exercise in education, talking about shared responsibility, and explaining the why. Why are we doing this? Why do we need to do this? Why do we need to achieve these certain goals, right?
Toot your horn a little. You developed a culture so much so that it improved the business. That your customers now are looking at your culture going, oh, they've got a really good security
100%, right? But absolutely. I didn't want to waste the opportunity to do that, right? Because I knew it was the right thing to do, the right thing by the business, but it also allowed me to align with the business. It gave me the door, it opened a doorway for me to learn the business as a security leader. Eventually to become the CIO and CISO, right? So as a leader, your title shouldn't matter. I guess that's the moral of my story. You can be a leader within your organization no matter your title, and you can drive your way to success, drive your way to the outcomes, if you're having the right conversations, building the right relationships, and building the right trust factor. I truly believe we have the opportunity to influence.
Yeah, Paul, I agree. You just nailed like 3 of the really critical things, right? So that's kind of tied into this, right? We talk about culture, then you have to say, well, what do we think a CISO is, or what should they aspire to be, right? And so from my perspective, they're responsible to help create and establish the culture, which is what you were just talking about, right?
Sorry, that was Jason, not me. Jason's smarter than I am.
Oh, Jason, I'm sorry.
Get out of here.
I meant to say Jason, sorry.
It's all good. It's all good.
So help create the culture, right? I mean, you have to be an influencer. That. Number 2, to inform on security risk, which is what you just nailed, right? And then it's the things that we more classically think of, right? To mitigate risk, to manage it when it occurs, right? So those are the more kind of tactical pieces that we've been doing for a lot of time. But the first 2 are the critical ones, right? Establishing a culture that security is intrinsically important to the entire company.
Yeah.
That's the win, right?
100%.
And so sometimes with like strong engineering people, it helps to use a different analogy. So I give the analogy of quality. Quality used to be thought of as in the same way, right? Until Dr. Schwartz, nobody thought about quality, right? It was just Paul was a craftsman, and whether he churned out a great material or not was totally up to his own skill set, right? And we changed the way we think about it, so everybody now knows quality is important, whether you're in transportation, HR, legal, finance, it doesn't matter. It's so embedded, but it took decades for that to happen. And it's the same way. Security needs to be thought of like quality, that it's just something that everybody does. It's a way we measure success, whether we build cars or bicycles or software. It has to be part of what we do.
Agreed.
Dutch, you hit on a point, but you didn't hit it as hard as I want you to, so I'm going to reiterate it for a second. What you said was manage risk, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Security doesn't own risk. The business does. And this business alignment conversation about being aligned with the business owns the risk. And the CISO's job is to work closely with the business to help them manage, understand, and maybe mitigate that risk. But security doesn't own it. And you went there a little bit, but I wanted to kind of double click on that a bit, because I think that's one thing some security forgets at times. The business owns the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what I need a whiteboard, right? So I start drawing pictures, right? So this is the way it should flow, or I would suggest it would flow based on COSO and NECD. So big frameworks that talk about business, not just security, right? And so really what it starts with is, if you're a public company, the board of directors is responsible to set risk appetite and risk tolerance. How much risk do we intend to take? And then how much variance against that are we willing to take? The board has to set that, because they have oversight responsibility. It's written right in there, right? That's their responsibility. So they set that. Then it's the business, Matt, to your point, and really this functionally usually means the CEO or the business leaders, the line of business leaders, if it's kind of abstracted that way. The business owns risk. They have to, because the business owns all risk. And so security people, like in a great way, like want to hold on to this, and I own the risk and I'm going to solve it. I'm the superhero. I love that idea too. It feels good, but it's not accurate, because it doesn't allow you to actually manage it correctly. And what I mean is, all risk is owned by the business. So look at a 10K, an annual report from a business. In section 1A, they'll list their risks, right? It could be the risk of currency fluctuation. It could be the risk of a natural disaster. It'll say the risk of competition, supply chain management. It'll go down the list of all these risks, right? Security, as much as we love it, is just one of those risks that a business manages. And they've been doing it ever since there were businesses. That's why we invented insurance. That's why we have actuaries. That's why we have CFOs. They manage risk too. We're just one of those pieces. And so to Jason's point, informing about that, that's clearly the CISO role, right? I have to inform, because that's my domain expertise, my judgment, my qualitative thoughts on where we are, both in our industry, our own company, and just the threat landscape, which changes, right? But you do not own the risk. If you think of it that way, first of all, it's going to be even more stressful than it should be. Yeah. It sets a negative tone for your teams, because they feel like if anything ever gets through, we have failed. That's a bad paradigm. You can't internalize it that way, right? So we inform, we mitigate. So in advance of the risk, we do our best, to be, the lower that attack surface. And then when it happens, which it will, we manage it. And then we communicate what's happening.
I think we've always kind of taken that mission as we're not going to be breached, right? And I think, Dutch, to your point, is it's when we're breached, it's not so bad, because we've got things in place to make it not so bad, right. Not as bad, right?
Yeah, and that's, I mentioned earlier, one of the first things I did with business units and business unit leaders was have the conversation around the shared responsibility across the board. It's a shared responsibility, and that's the decision on, how we're going to handle risk, right? So it's a shared responsibility, and I was upfront and transparent. My team can't do it all, right? My team can't do it all. We need you. We need your business unit to help. And you'll be amazed how organizations begin to mature over time, where now the CISO starts dealing with other risks outside of technology, process risks, right?
Yes.
regulatory risks that aren't traditionally in the domain, because now you're starting to be viewed as that risk leader. Because now you can look at things and start identifying risk and say, how do we want to handle this? How do we want to handle that risk? And then not necessarily always in the technology domain. There are so many instances where I'm dealing with non-tech business risk these days, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And Matt, I know we've had this conversation before, right? Start treating it as risk management, or you'll end up reporting to risk management at the end of the day.
Jason, listen to you. I think it's sometimes you make it sound easy, right? And it's not. Though it's a journey, right?
It's been years and years and years, Paul.
Right. I remember being at the university going, I can't do this even with a small team of security people. I need others to be engaged. And you can't. That's not just like one meeting, right?
No way.
And I think that's it can be a frustrating thing to realize that it takes time to build culture, to build trust. You can't just have one meeting and go, well, look at all these really bad hacks that happen over here. Like that could be us. Therefore, everyone should care about security. If only it were that easy, but it's not.
No, and I 100% agree, right? Like I'm talking about a 6-year time period right now.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to articulate.
It was me at university, having monthly meetings, meeting with people, talking with them, helping them.
Asking to be
trust.
engaged.
Yes.
Do you know how many times I've asked, hey, include me in a meeting, include me in this session, include me with your team, include one of my directors in this meeting, right? That's the kind of conversation. It's almost like you have to push the issue to get trusted, to get into that inner circle. And then once you're in, now you can start building that trust, building those relationships, right? But in the beginning, you have to break down those silos, really break down the wall, and push to have those conversations. We need to be here, and here's why.
Right.
Yeah, it's not trivial. And to your point, Paul, it's changing behavior.
Yeah, that's hard.
Behavioral change, as we all know, it is hard, right? So value, attitudes, and beliefs go into that, and the outcome is behavior. And it takes time. And to both of your points, it's about being accepted and trusted as a business executive. That's the threshold, right? That's when you've made it through the veil, as it were, right? You need to be seen as part of one of the business executives, and Jason, to your point, and be asked about stuff that's not just about security.
Yeah, that's huge, Dutch.
That's how you can test that.
Right, I ran into that early in my career, and it was one of those like aha moments where I'm like, oh. Like people don't realize that I am actually interested as to how your business unit operates and how your technology operates, and not just whether you're patched or not. Like, I want to know who's using the technology, what's the process, what's it used for, and
who's not using the technology.
Yeah,
because that's a big piece as well, right? Because that could be risk.
As hackers and security people, I think people don't understand that we really do want to understand that stuff, because that's how we're going to help mitigate the risk. Right?
Yeah, and again, allowing yourself to be a little bit vulnerable, because again, in front of leaders, I've said multiple times that I don't know enough about the business. Teach me. I want to learn. Please, right? Come on, teach me about the business. And it's really just having that. I had a drive to understand the business and understand how I can snap security in, right, to be a differentiator. Not be that cost center we talked about in the first 3 minutes of the statement.
One of those moments in university where you catch yourself and you're like, wait, development office. I'm like, wait, hold on. They're not making software, right? I'm like, whoa, wait. Tell me how this whole process works, because I have not worked in development in a university. And I did. I spent time with the people there. I'm just like, what exactly do you, I understand now conceptually it's not software, but what is it you do?
Right.
Now, the other interesting statement, Dutch, that I want to go down is, also, security didn't pick the cloud. The business picked the cloud. And it's like the same situation as risk, right? The business is making these decisions about why should we move to the cloud. We kind of know the reasons why, but that's another big, I think, challenge for security teams is they didn't make that choice necessarily. The business made it.
Yeah, it's pretty consistent that the business makes the choice for the business, right? And so while that can be frustrating sometimes in our role, you have to accept that, again, that's their prerogative to do that. Now, hopefully, if you have the time and the tenure and the trust, right, like Paul and Jason mentioned, and you're there with them, then hopefully you're part of that. But you may not be. You may not have been at the table at the time that decision was made 2 years ago. So then what you have to do is say, okay, how do I maximize the choice that they've made or we've made, right? And now I'm going to have to buy in. This is the choice. And we're moving there. And then I would dig deep to Paul's point and say, what is it we're trying to do here? What's the goal, right? So we know some of the overt things that Cloud brings anybody, right, if they move to the cloud. But what are we specifically trying to do, right? And so there's 5 that I orient on just to help kind of technical people understand the business, right? So it's improving customer experience. That could be internal or external customer experience. Flexibility, speed to market, reducing friction, increasing innovation. It's usually one of those 5. And you might have different words at a different company, but generally it falls in those 5 categories. And you need to understand that. Our going to the cloud allows us to do what vis-a-vis our customers, our competitors, our place in the market, right? And you need to understand that. And you may have a discussion where the devs are saying, we need the speed. And then as security saying, okay, well, but I have to do that, but reduce friction. So how do I do that? I have to put in guardrails, right? But you have to rethink that. But it starts with, you got to understand the business initiatives.
That's it.
What are we trying to, not just go to the cloud? That's a big, huge, bouncy term. It can mean a lot of things. It can mean everything from shrink wrap, a SaaS. Oh, I have Salesforce. Okay, cool. That's a thing, but it's not the entire cloud. To a very complex, a container, serverless, really complex microservices thing. It's a huge range there. So what is the business trying to accomplish? Because then you, as the trusted advisor, can advise, okay, here's our risk. Here's the challenges, pros and cons. Where are we going to end up with this risk? Because we got to decide, are we accepting it? And maybe we don't want to accept it as a security person, but the business has made a choice.
But we have no choice, right?
Ideally, in Dutch, what you're saying is, I think what I garner from it, obviously I'm a security person, but we can do this more securely. I think it can enhance security, right? And when you're talking about things, reducing friction, increasing the speed at which you can develop, that means you can push new code faster and fix things faster, right? Absolutely. I think all these are good things we've established at this point, up to this point, that they're good things for security.
Yeah, and one other big thing about the cloud, right? So irrespective of which flavor or multiple flavors you choose, right? One big thing about the cloud as a paradigm and the way it's constructed is APIs. You have APIs. APIs mean things are knowable, right? It's really hard on-prem or prem hybrid or prem, a third party. Things are not knowable. It's really tough because the whole fact that the CASB space exists is because your users have access to cloud resources that maybe you didn't intend, right? So that ship has sailed. So in the cloud, though, in that domain that you're in, you have APIs. Everything is a call. Therefore, everything is visible. I can log everything, which means then I can automate everything, which means I can integrate everything, which equates to speed. Those are the steps. And that's why cloud is so powerful if you orient on that as the CISO and the security team.
Yeah, and I think it makes a shift in the way you think about your security program. We were talking about this, Dutch, right? Maybe I don't need to worry about the network and the endpoint because some of that is known and it's an API call. Where I need to focus is higher in the stack. How does that shift my budget priorities? How does that shift the types of controls I'm implementing in the environment when cloud's involved?
Absolutely. So, again, you're not, like, hey, I don't have to do security anymore, right? That's not the thing, right? It sort of comes across flippantly sometimes when people are throwing darts at any kind of change like this. That's not really what any cloud service provider is trying to express, right? What they're saying is, hey, these are the things that we're going to take care of, right? And, by agreement. So then what you need to do is shift, to your point, Matt, higher in the stack, right? You really need to understand identity. You really understand your data. And how you intend for it to reside and interact with other resources. And you have to understand the application layer. And so you got to shift your security knowledge to those areas.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's taking a lot of the keep the lights on run functions away. And now you're starting to focus on growth and transformation of your organization. We have to have a mind shift, right? And I think taking the security team away from some of that tactical stuff is a good thing because now you're taking your talent pool and allowing them to focus on growth and transformation of the organization.
Right, and then you can align to whatever the business does as the business. Right? So let's just presume, like in your case, Jason. So if we're in the technology space, then we probably have engineering and devs, right? Then you can align with them. Right. Because frankly, they're driving the business. So let's get aligned with them, right? Matt, you and I talked about an example. You and I both came from a networking background. There's a period of networking where it was thought of as plumbing and it was just behind the walls and nobody cared about it, right? And I had a large project with a very large healthcare provider. And I was talking with this my advocate about, well, how do we move the project forward? He said, no, I'm going to go talk to the key departments and talk about their projects. And then I'm going to say, hey, to do your project, correctly at speed and scale that you want, we need to have these things happen in the networking budget. And that's how things move through. And so it stopped becoming a cost center, right? Or even an apportioned cost. And it was, hey, we have a new project. We have to build this into the project because that's how we enable it. And we have to get there in security where I know it's so like glib to say we have to enable the business, but it's true. We have to enable 100%. The business. So we have to get smart at understanding how the business derives value and tie into that.
Exactly right. And I think that's the opportunity as we're looking to move from on-premise infrastructure to cloud infrastructure. Can I rethink the way I'm approaching security? Right. And by the way, can I now embed some of these new capabilities into these business projects as we're moving and migrating to the cloud?
Right. It can feel overwhelming for a moment when you think about that change, but the change is happening. So it's an opportunity for you to pause and rethink. Let's think about, did the controls change? Maybe they just changed names, right? What we're trying to control and our mechanisms. Again, some of the tactical stuff, maybe it will change names or tools or approaches slightly. But if you focus on the big movement, then you're going to win, right? The big movement is we have to do things at speed and scale, right? You can't go into a dev environment where they're doing 30 updates a day and continue to do security the way we did on-prem. Right. It will flat out absolutely fail.
The business will screech to a halt. Rethink all that.
Yeah.
You don't want to be that reason, right? You don't want to be the reason why a business stopped. And it's not nirvana. Even as a security team who I feel is decently embedded in the business, there are surprises that happen. Hey, by the way, we bought this. Hey, by the way, we're moving this way. Hey, by the way, this is what's happening. It's like, okay, jump on the train, right? Let's paint that plane mid-flight, and it happens. It's all how you handle it, right? It's all how you handle that surprise.
Just hope your engine doesn't fall apart and drop debris over Matt's house.
Right. Actually, it was closer to Dutch's house than it was mine.
Are you in Colorado, Dutch? Yeah.
I am. I'm even closer than he is. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
My thing was what do they do with the debris? Who do you call to get huge parts of an engine from a plane removed from your yard?
The Men in Black show up.
That, right?
Does my United 1K status allow for debris pickup?
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
Yeah. It's a souvenir.
That's all right. You keep it. It's a new lawn ornament.
Oh gosh. Dutch, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly. It was a great discussion.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I appreciate being on. I watched the show, of course, so I appreciate it. And next time, cigars will be in force. And thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Awesome. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.